Let us begin our quiet descent into a different time, a land of mist-shrouded mountains, echoing temple bells, and footsteps softened by tatami mats. Tonight, we journey to feudal Japan, a place often romanticized for its cherry blossoms, noble, warriors, and tranquil tea ceremonies. But behind the painted screens and bamboo groves lay a world far less serene, one shaped by hunger, fear, and the ever-tightening threads of social duty. Imagine now the faint scent of wood smoke drifting through the cold morning air. The sun is slow to rise, casting only a pale, silvery glow through the paper shoji walls of your home, if you are lucky enough to have a home, that is. Most did not. You stir awake, not to the gentle call of birdsong, but to the creak of a rice straw door and the sharp crack of your father's voice. Time to work. It is always time to work. You are not a samurai. You are not a poet. You are a peasant, born into the muddy bottom of a rigid class system. Your hands are rough from hauling water and tilling rocky fields. Your back is bent from years of planting rice beneath a relentless sun. Breakfast, if it comes, is a thin gruel of millet or barley. No fish, no miso, just enough to keep your legs moving, and move you must. The fields need tending. The taxes, the taxes must be paid. The local lord has sent word that his samurai will be collecting a portion of your harvest this month. A generous word, portion. It often means most. You hide a few precious grains in an old clay pot beneath the floorboards, but even this is a gamble. If you're caught, your punishment may involve more than words. Samurai carry blades. They also carry grudges. The road to the fields is narrow and slick, lined with stones smoothed by generations of footsteps. Every so often, a retainer on horseback barrels past, not even slowing to acknowledge your presence. If the mud splashes your robes, you are expected to bow in thanks, not protest. Honor here flows only one way. As you plant seedlings, your feet sink into cold water. Leeches find their way beneath your leggings. A sneeze here, a cough there. Small reminders that there are no doctors for people like you. The village healer is a woman with herbs and stories, and if those fail, she will offer a prayer. Most deaths are quiet and expected. Children vanish before names settle into memory. Fevers burn through families, and still, the rice must be planted. Midday brings no rest. You chew a strip of dried radish and drink from a bamboo flask filled with river water. It tastes faintly of moss and frogs. Above you, crows cackle from crooked trees. You do not laugh back. There is no time. When you return home at dusk, your legs are trembling. The house is smoky from a cooking fire. Someone is boiling millet again. You sit, not to relax, but to sew a sandal that snapped in the mud. Tomorrow, you must wear it again. Always again. A monk passes through the village this evening, ringing a bell and chanting sutras. You bow, not because you are devout necessarily, but because it is expected. He leaves behind the scent of incense and a vague sense of unease. The dead are being honored tonight. Perhaps you, too, will be among them soon. As you lie on your mat, stomach hollow and limbs sore, you wonder what it must be like to live in a storybook version of Japan, the one with silk kimonos and moonlit jewels. But this, here, is the story that never gets told. A life measured in rice stalks, in silence, in small dignities carried quietly through the dirt. Sleep does not come. Quickly, outside, a dog howls once, then stops. You close your eyes and drift, not toward dreams, but into a kind of numbness. A survival sleep. And as the fire dies to embers, you wonder, if born again, would you choose this life? Or would you rather vanish, like the mist, before the bell tolls morning? Outside the paper-thin walls of the village huts, the morning air in feudal Japan carried a hush, broken only by the soft, repetitive thunk of bamboo striking bamboo. Somewhere near the training field, a low-ranking samurai drilled alone, his form sharp, his breath visible in the crisp dawn. Mist clung to the earth like a forgotten blanket, curling around rice paddies and narrow footpaths, worn smooth by centuries of straw sandals. The smell of damp earth mixed with faint traces of wood smoke and pickled radish. Roosters called into the silence with a hollow defiance, unaware or unbothered by their fragile place in the food chain. Life here wasn't grand. It was obligation and layers of silence. Even a child knew not to laugh too loudly. Laughter, like curiosity, was a dangerous luxury, and luxuries were rare. Most villagers rose before the sun, not because they were eager, but because their bellies dictated it. Rice, if you had it. Gruel, if you didn't. A small pot bubbled weakly over charcoal embers, releasing steam that clung to the low ceiling beams and stained them over time with the memory of every humble meal. Women swept courtyards, with bundled reeds, whispering prayers to unseen kami that the harvest wouldn't fail. Men shouldered wooden buckets and moved with a kind of tired precision toward the paddies. Their movements not rushed, just endlessly practiced. Children, still too new to fear the future, chased each other with sticks pretending they were swords, until a stern grandmother clapped her hands once, sharply. Playtime was brief, fantasy was dangerous, and everything was about respect. There was a hierarchy, invisible and suffocating. The samurai wore his status like an odor, always there. Even when he smiled, and he rarely did, it wasn't from warmth, it was from obligation. Politeness, after all, could be sharper than any katana. Inside the homes, the tatami mats were fraying. A single candle might serve as both light and timekeeper. Meals were taken in silence, not from solemnity, but necessity. Speaking too much was considered wasteful. Even joy, if you could afford it, was best consumed quietly. And then there was the constant awareness of impermanence. The word for it was mujo. A sense that everything, even this damp, aching moment, would vanish. Maybe it was the Buddhist monks who introduced the idea. Or maybe people just knew. You didn't hold on to much. You didn't decorate walls with portraits. You didn't boast, because the shogun could change. A lord could fall, and then your entire village could be ordered to disappear, just like that. Midday brought more monotony. The sun, filtered through layers of thin cloud, offered little warmth. Farmers hunched in their flooded fields, backs bent like bowed reeds. The water around their ankles held leeches. But the worst part wasn't the bites. It was the numbness that came from standing too still. No shoes, just patience. Nearby, in a manor barely larger than the biggest barn, the local daimyo dictated orders with a voice too soft for doubt. His tea had been prepared 3 times before he accepted it. Each time, a servant bowed lower, hoping to avoid punishment. And punishment here didn't shout. It whispered, a slow dismissal, a missing portion of rice, a sudden assignment to clean the latrines during festival week. And above it all, the seasons waited. They didn't care about politics or rituals. They just moved. Cherry blossoms fell like confetti over graves. Typhoons arrived on rice planting days. Frost killed the last remaining gourds before the priest could bless them. Nature had its own shogunate, and it ruled without ceremony. At night, the village settled into hush again. The hearth was banked. The mat rolled out. One old man, teeth mostly gone, whispered a tale of a fox spirit that seduced drunk samurai. A girl listened, wide-eyed, until her mother turned with a look that said, enough. Outside, the wind combed through reeds and rattled the thatched roofs with indifferent fingers. The stars above were bright but unreachable, and everyone, warrior, farmer, wife, child, dreamed quietly, or not at all. And so another day ended, silent, smoky, soaked in duty. One more footnote in a time where survival was its own kind of courage. Now close your eyes, if they're not already closed, and ask yourself, in a world where even laughter had to be earned, how long could you have lasted? Shall we step deeper into the shadowed alleys of feudal Japan next? The sun over feudal Japan did not rise with gentle affection. It peeled itself across the ridges of thatched rooftops and rice paddies like a lantern relit after too many hours of darkness. And beneath that glare, barefoot and bent at the waist, trudged the backbones of the empire, rice farmers known as Hayakusho. They were the ones who fed samurai pride and imperial bureaucracy, and they did so with their spines as much as with their hands. Their mornings began before the world softened. You might imagine a rooster crowing, but often it was the gurgle of a stomach or the creak of a stiff joint that marked the dawn. Their first steps each day were into cold water, ankle-deep mud, and the scent of wet earth soaked in the remains of last season's labor. Not poetic mud. This was wormy, frog-filled, nail-snagging, toe-numbing mire. Rice wasn't just food. It was the currency of power. It was taxed before it was tasted. The shogunate didn't care much for the weather or whether the farmer's child had died the night before from fever. The quota remained the same. You grew rice, and the taxman came. If the harvest failed, you still owed. Starvation wasn't a disaster. It was an accounting issue. Tax collectors didn't come alone. They arrived on horseback, their blades sharp, not for use, but for show. They wore lacquered armor that shimmered like beetle shells and brought clerks who carried long scrolls and short tempers. They read aloud the numbers you knew too well. Then they took sacks of rice that smelled more of your sweat than of grain and left you with barely enough to keep your own bones upright. And if you were lucky, they left quietly. Sometimes they didn't. Sometimes a complaint, a hesitation, a sideways glance earned you a backhand or a punishment in front of your children. Disrespect, after all, was a taxable offense too, and when the officials left, your wife might ask, "Did they take too much?" And you'd lie. You'd say, "No," because what remained was now everything, and it had to be enough. Meals in a farmer's hut were frugal poetry. A handful of rice stretched with millet, some pickled radish if fortune smiled, perhaps a bowl of broth thin enough to see the bottom of the bowl, and silence. Long, rhythmic silence broken only by the chewing of resignation. The homes, if you could call them that, were humble structures, no thicker than their secrets. Woven walls let in breezes that weren't invited, and the thatched roofs let in rains that weren't needed. The floor was earth, and on it your children slept, dreaming of samurai tales they would never live. In summer, mosquitoes buzzed with the zeal of unpaid soldiers. In winter, frost crept in like a silent thief and made the wooden bowls feel like metal. The fires burned low, for wood was rationed, and the only warmth that truly lingered was from huddled bodies. And yet, in this grey discomfort, life carried on. Children were born into calloused hands and crooked knees. Old men told stories in candlelight about harvests that were bountiful and summers that didn't scorch. The women plucked lice from each other's hair and sang lullabies made of monotone hope. The irony was sharp. These farmers, invisible to the castle walls they served, held up the very society that dismissed them. The samurai were praised for their code, but the peasants lived one daily. Quiet endurance, uncelebrated sacrifice, and unwavering submission to a world that never asked their opinion. As you lie there now, perhaps on a soft mattress in a climate-controlled room, let yourself imagine the straw mat, the itching bite of a flea, the creak of a thatched ceiling in the wind. Could you truly bear it? And if your dreams take you to the paddy fields tonight, remember to bow low when the taxman passes. Don't look him in the eye, don't speak unless asked, and hold tightly to whatever rice remains, because in feudal Japan, your dignity weighed less than a grain of rice. Would you still say you'd survive the day? In legends, the Ronin is draped in moonlight, his silhouette sharp against a paper screen, his blade swift and honorable, his path tragic yet noble. But that is the Ronin, from theatre scrolls and painted fans. The real Ronin, the masterless samurai, lived a life less carved in stone and more etched into the dirt of back alleys, and cold rice gruel. To become Ronin was not a choice. It was a fall, a tumble from the structured hierarchy that kept feudal Japan stacked like lacquered boxes, daimyo above samurai, samurai above peasants, peasants above artisans, and all of them above the untouchables. To lose one's master was to become a sword without a sheath, a name without a clan. Some Ronin wandered the provinces offering their blade in exchange for shelter. Others gambled in smoke-filled inns where laughter was forced and tea was bitter. They wore the same two swords, yes, but the steel often dulled, the scabbards patched with twine, and their hakama smelled more of old sake than battlefields. You might pass one on a muddy path and not know it. He wouldn't look like the statues. His topknot might be undone, his eyes sunken not from stoicism, but from hunger. Ronin weren't always the lone wolves of poetry. Sometimes they were beggars with pride too bruised to kneel. Cities did not welcome them. Neither did villages. To house a Ronin was to invite suspicion. After all, what kind of warrior loses his lord and doesn't die with him? That was the whisper behind closed shoji screens. Coward, traitor, or just unlucky? But misfortune wasn't contagious unless it came with a sword, and so many Ronin turned inward. They brooded, they drank, they trained with invisible enemies, slicing air in the morning fog as if redemption might come in the shape of an imagined duel. Some joined gangs. Others tried to become monks, but found that the silence of a temple couldn't erase the silence of disgrace. One tale tells of a Ronin who spent his last coins on ink and parchment. He wrote a letter to a child he had once fathered in another province, apologizing for not being the man the child needed. Then he hung his swords on a tree and disappeared into the woods. The swords were found years later, rusted and cradled by moss, like forgotten gods. Still, some Ronin sought honor the only way they knew, by staging one final act. A vendetta, a sacrifice, a brush with death so dramatic it might paint over the shame. The 47. Ronin, those famed warriors of loyalty, took this path. But for every Ronin that made it into legend, there were 100 who simply faded, their names lost between the pages of history and fiction. The irony, a samurai's entire life was bound to loyalty, to duty, and yet, as a Ronin, he could no longer be loyal to anything except the slow unraveling of his own myth. So next time you think the Ronin life is one of poetic solitude, imagine this instead. A man crouched beneath a bridge during a winter rain, his swords wrapped in cloth to keep them from rusting further, his hands stiff with cold. No fire, no meal, just the sound of passing footsteps above him. People who don't know he's there, people who wouldn't care if they did. And as you settle under your warm blanket tonight, maybe ask yourself, would you have carried the blade with such dignity once the world decided you were no longer a samurai? Or would the sword have grown too heavy? The sun doesn't rise in feudal Japan with fanfare. It peeks over misty hills shyly, like a servant unsure of its welcome. And for the farmer, the backbone of the nation, though rarely treated like one, daybreak meant no poetry. It meant water, mud, the cold sting of wet sandals and the slap of hunger before breakfast. Let's walk, slowly, into the life of one of these forgotten pillars. He's nameless. Most were. Let's say he rises before the rooster, before the frost has retreated, from the clay walls of his thatched home. His breath clouds the morning air like smoke from a dying ember. No fire burns yet. His wife is already outside, feeding scraps to the pig that will not see another spring. He stretches. His back creaks like an old cartwheel and reaches for the same coarse robe he wore yesterday and the day before and all the days stretching back into memory. There's no ceremony to this life, no lacquered bento, just a palmful of rice, if lucky, and some fermented bean paste that tastes mostly of thyme. Then it's to the fields. Not fields of golden abundance, but narrow, flooded, paddies with water that smells slightly metallic and teems with leeches if you're not careful. He trudges in barefoot, Shoes are a luxury, and besides, they'd just sink. The mud grabs him like a jealous ghost. He stoops to inspect the chutes. Some are too yellow, a bad omen, or just bad soil. Either way, he says nothing. There is no one to complain to, because to be a farmer in feudal Japan was not to be free. It was to serve. The land belonged to a lord, some distant, silk-wrapped man who hadn't bent his back in years. The harvest would be measured, taxed, and taken. 1/3 if the year was good, half if it was bad, all if there was war, and there was always war. Floods didn't ask permission. Locusts didn't heed prayers. Famine was not an event but a season, like summer, like frost. He once lost a brother to starvation. The family simply stopped speaking of him, as if the body could be erased by silence. In the distance, a bell rings, not a temple bell, a warning. Bandits, perhaps, or a tax collector, which was sometimes worse. He quickens his pace, hoping to finish the planting, but he knows the rhythm: labor, harvest, surrender, repeat. Generations lived and died this way, folded into the rhythm of rice and regret. And yet, the farmer dreams, not of escape, no, that would be indulgent. He dreams, instead of a year with no flood, of a child who survives the winter, of a lord who forgets to send the collector. It's a dream made of dirt and hope, simple, muddy, stubborn. Back home, as night closes in, he chews slowly. He doesn't speak much. The child beside him hums a tune learned from the old neighbor. Outside, frogs begin their chorus. Insects rustle the thatch. And tomorrow will come, the same way it always has, with wet sandals and bent knees. But now, in the hush of this dim room, lit by a single oil lamp, he dares one more indulgence. He touches the small wooden amulet his wife keeps hidden under their sleeping mat. It's worn smooth by years of quiet reverence. He doesn't know what spirit it represents. He doesn't need to. He just hopes it's listening. And so I wonder, if tomorrow you awoke to this life, of rice and obligation, of silence and soggy fields, would you last even one season? Or would you, like many who came before, simply bow your head and endure? While some bent to rice, others bent to steel. Let's leave the soggy paddies behind for now and step into the inner sanctum of a different kind of devotion, a place that smells not of mud, but of iron, ash, and sweat thick enough to stain the lungs, a blacksmith's forge glowing like a wound at the heart of a village. The apprentice is already there. He sleeps in the corner, curled on straw that has long given up its claim to comfort. His hands, even in sleep, are curled as if still holding the tongs. Calloused, cracked, raw. The hands of someone who hasn't held a brush in years. And that used to matter to him, once, before the forge. Took everything delicate. The master doesn't speak. He rarely does. His approval is meted out in nods, and his wrath in a silence colder than quenched steel. Today, the apprentice is to reheat a tang, the narrow part of the blade that sinks into the handle. He is to do it perfectly, not too soft, not too brittle, and he will fail, because it is his turn to fail. That's the rhythm of learning here. Repeat, blister, try again. His master once told him, every blade drinks its own mistakes. He doesn't know if that was poetry or threat. Maybe both. The forge hisses as the iron glows red. Sparks leap like angry insects. The room is dark beyond the fire, the way shrines are, sacred, but unforgiving. The air is thick with burnt charcoal and the sour tang of old metal. He breathes it in without flinching. You stop noticing the smell after a few seasons. Your nose dulls, like the rest of you. Only your ears remain sharp, tuned to the master's cough, the hiss of oil, the scream of iron under the hammer. Outside, the world churns in war and tax and hunger. But inside this forge, there is only one truth. Steel does not lie. He hammers. The rhythm is hypnotic, a lullaby of labor. Tap, tap, strike, breathe. The kind of sound that settles in the bones and echoes there long after. With every blow, he tries to erase yesterday's failure. He dreams that one day his blade might rest at the hip of a samurai, admired, feared, honored. That someone might say, "This is no ordinary sword." That someone might remember his name. But most blades are forgotten. Most craftspeople fade into the soot of history. Their work endures, not their story. And that too is part of the deal. The master finally approaches. He lifts the blade. He does not speak. He holds it up to the light that creeps between the thatched roof slats. Then gently he tilts it. A flaw, barely visible, a bubble, a weakness. He hands it back, wordlessly. The apprentice bows low. Too low, perhaps, a little shamefully. The blade will be melted again tomorrow. Tonight, the apprentice sits on the edge of the fire pit, fingers wrapped in cloth, staring into the embers as if they hold some answer. They don't, but the glow is comforting, like failure that's expected, like disappointment worn smooth over time. He hums a song his mother used to sing when she washed rice. He cannot remember the words, just the melody, just the way her hands moved through water. And as sleep tiptoes into the corners of his tired frame, I ask you gently, how long would you last, shaping steel for men who'll never know your name, even in a land burdened by rice taxes, swordsmiths, and the weight of unseen wars? There were oases of quiet, a different kind of theatre, performed not with blades, but with glances, posture, and the whisper of silk sliding against tatami. Enter now, slowly, with your socks barely brushing the floor. The paper screen slides shut behind you, and suddenly, the world is quieter, softer, dim. You've stepped into a tea house, not a bustling tavern or a farmer's respite, but a place that hums with controlled elegance, where even the dust dares not move too quickly. The air is warm, heavy with the scent of tatami straw, pine smoke, and the faintest trace of incense, sandalwood perhaps. A geisha sits across the room, motionless but alert, like a paper lantern waiting for dusk. Her white painted face is serene, unreadable. Her eyes don't quite meet yours. That is not their role. You're not a guest here. Not really. You're a presence. And every presence shifts the room. Her hands move, finally. A slow fan opens, not for cooling, but as punctuation. Each movement has meaning. A tilt of the wrist is greeting. A lowered gaze is deference. A sip of tea is both a beginning and an end. You are not merely drinking, you are performing. The cup is turned a precise quarter rotation. The bow is deliberate. Nothing is casual. Everything, ceremony. Outside, the world burns. Samurai clash. Peasants plot. Monks chant. But inside, in this lacquered quiet, war feels distant, as though silence itself might be armor. But don't be fooled. This is not a place of ease. Not for her. Not for the women trained since childhood to smile just so, to dance without sweating, to laugh on cue. Her kimono weighs more than a child. Her obi belt is a corset of silk and duty. Her teeth ache from the paste. Her hands bear the bruises of an art too refined to be noticed. She pours your tea. Not too quickly, not too slowly. She knows your type. You, who come seeking mystery, or perhaps comfort, or perhaps just a story to take home. You'll forget her name, but remember the way the fan flicked open like a secret. And that's the contract, isn't it? Across the room, a shamisen plays. The notes pluck like footsteps on stone. Melancholic, but polite about it. A song about longing, probably, or the sea, or a lover who vanished. But it could just as easily be about tea leaves and time. The stories are all the same in the end. Your Tea cools as your mind drifts. You wonder if this is peace. It isn't, but it's the closest you'll get tonight. And as the fan closes with a gentle click, as if saying that's enough now, you realize how exhausting it must be to live in a world where even rest is choreographed. Would you last a day, moving without mistake, smiling through silence, perfecting an art meant to be invisible, or would your hands betray you, spilling the tea, cracking the illusion, ending the show before the curtain even rose? Let us walk now, slowly, beneath the moss-darkened eaves of a mountain temple, the kind where the rain doesn't fall so much as linger, hovering in misty curtains, coating every cedar trunk in quiet. The path is slick with age, stones worn down not by feet, but by patience. You arrive just as the morning bell finishes its groan. The sound echoes not once, but twice. It circles back around the trees like a ghost remembering its route. The temple grounds are still, except for a thin wisp of smoke curling from the brazier near the inner gate. A monk stands beside it, barefoot. Despite the chill, his robes as grey as the sky. Inside, the floor creaks gently beneath your steps, though the monks pretend not to notice. They've trained for this, years of deliberate nothing, of rising before light, of kneeling until knees forget comfort, of meals so bland even the rice apologizes. This is a Soto Zen temple, and everything here whispers, let go of your name, your thoughts, the ache in your spine, the insect crawling up the window frame. Let go of the world. You sit on a tatami mat that smells faintly of mildew and old incense, and a master, older than anyone ought to be, claps his hands once. Then silence. Zazen. You sit and breathe and sit, and every part of your body begins to scream. Not in words, but in pins and needles, and the deep, bone-level confusion of a back not made for stillness. This is no retreat. There is no comfort. The bowl of millet and boiled roots is not served with a nod, but a lesson. The calligraphy scrolls on the wall are not decoration, but reminders. The world is like dew on the grass, fleeting, insignificant, wet. At night, you sleep on wood. No cushion, no dreams, only the chorus of frogs and the wind that sounds, suspiciously like someone whispering, "You don't belong here." You think of your life, of chairs, of warm socks, of food with taste, of not being cold all the time, and slowly, as your legs fall asleep, and your pride follows, you begin to understand. This isn't punishment, it's training. Not for war, but for the war within. The war of ego, the itch to speak, the need to matter. Here, in this ink-stained, rain-washed monastery, you are a speck. You are the space between brushstrokes, and that, they say, is the point. But would you last a day here, without speaking, without moving, without checking the time? Or would you bolt before the next bell, craving the noise of your own voice, and the comfort of knowing what comes next? As the mist lifts from the monastery rooftops, we drift downhill, not swiftly, but with the quiet descent of a fallen blossom, into a village where the roofs sag with the weight of yesterday's storms, and the walls lean inward like they've been listening too long. Here, among the uneven footpaths and the unpainted doors, lives someone people prefer not to mention, not because of danger, but discomfort. The outcast, or hinin, which in the soft syllables of the old tongue meant non-person. They live just beyond the rice paddies, past the crooked fence, near the edge where the forest starts to mutter. Their home is barely more than a shed, patched with bark and broken tiles, and when the wind hits from the east, it whistles through like it's searching for a memory. You may pass by this place and wonder, why is it so quiet here? Because here lives someone tasked with touching what others won't. The dead, the leather, the blood, the bones. In feudal Japan, class wasn't just a concept. It was a cage made of silence, and some were born outside it entirely. The outcasts. Hands are stained not with shame, but with work, important, thankless, and invisible. They shape sandals from animal hide, cure skins, Remove the bodies no one else will touch. And yet, when they walk past the main well, the chatter dims. The children are pulled away. A sleeve hides a mouth. But you stop and speak. You ask for water. You compliment their sandals. You nod as though you see them. And what you get in return is the gentlest of smiles. Toothless, crooked, sun-browned. They don't speak much, but they gesture toward a bowl of pickled daikon and pour you tea that smells faintly of dirt and dried chrysanthemum. You sit, and in that moment, their silence isn't awkward. It's peaceful. Still, would you last? Could you bear the sideways glances, the rituals that don't include you, the festivals where your name isn't spoken? Could you know your work was essential and still be seen as unclean? Or would you rebel, speak too loudly, or worse, cry in public, as if your pain needed explanation? The Hinnon never explain. They know no one listens, but tonight you did. And in this small, sagging hut at the edge of the world, that was enough. By now, you've wandered through castles and huts, trudged barefoot through rice paddies, and knelt before gods carved from stone. But tonight, the candle burns low beside a solitary figure hunched beneath an open window. The room smells of old ink, wet wood, and fatigue. Welcome to the world of the village scribe, a place where silence is not peace, but pressure. He isn't a samurai. He doesn't carry a blade. He carries parchment, reed brushes, and the weight of everyone else's stories, but his own. If you ask him what he does, he'll shrug and say, "I write." But that's like a tree saying it merely leans. The truth is, in feudal Japan, a scribe held the fragile lattice of community together, recording debts, tax inventories, letters to distant sons, and when asked politely, poems for funerals. Not his own, of course. His grief stays off the page. He wakes before the bell, not because he must, but because his bones refuse to sleep longer. There's always a petition to transcribe, an account to correct, a missive to the magistrate that must sound deferential, but not desperate. His brush, once elegant, now splinters near the grip. 1,000 letters, 1,000 names, and no time to mend it. You sit beside him. He doesn't look up. The kanji flows from his wrist as if summoned. The sound is soothing. Soft bristles dragging across rice paper, punctuated by a subtle exhale when a character feels just right. Around him, the world is hushed but heavy. Outside, a rooster crows prematurely, confused by a flickering lantern. Inside, a teacup sits untouched, its contents cooled into bitterness. He tells you about the time the tax was miscounted, and a family lost their ox because of it. He corrected the error. No one thanked him. Then there was the merchant's son, who could not write his own name, but needed love letters written in a style borrowed from court poets. The scribe obliged. The boy was married 2 months later. Still sends gifts. Ugly, ons, but tonight the scribe's back aches more than usual. The brush slips once, leaving a blot. His breath catches. He stares at it like a wound. In this time, mistakes aren't just messy, they're shameful. If this were an official record, he'd be punished. Not beaten, but humiliated. Quietly. The kind of punishment that makes you bow a little lower each day until your back forgets how to straighten. He begins again. Ink, breath, brush. You wonder, could you sit in this stillness? Could you labor for truth no one thanks you for, serving power that sees through you? Could you hold the weight of a village's memory and still have none of your own? His eyes finally meet yours, tired, kind, a bit amused. This story, he says, isn't mine. Then he picks up the next page. Evening descends like thick ink spilled from a careless brush. It stains the paper lanterns a deeper orange, turns the gravel paths silver with dew, and casts every wooden beam into soft, uncertain relief. Within the flickering shadows of a Kyoto, back alley, a hush falls, one not born of silence, but of reverence. The actors are arriving. This is the world of No and Kabuki, where reality is paused and truth is told in whispers, movements, and masks. You duck beneath a low lintel into a narrow structure of pine and paper, where the scent of incense competes with the musk of sweat and old paint. The dressing room hums softly. The men, always men, even in the most delicate female roles, move with a careful grace, adjusting layers of costume, brushing rouge onto tired cheeks. One applies a stark white base to his face, his fingers trembling ever so slightly as he meets his reflection, not with vanity, but with a kind of recognition. The mask will do the talking tonight. In feudal Japan, to be a performer was to live on a razor's edge, exalted for beauty, distrusted for freedom. They belonged to no clan, they served no daimyo, and yet, for a few stolen hours, they commanded nobles and peasants alike, with nothing but the flick of a sleeve and the slow turn of a painted head. The audience waits now, folding fans in hand, seated shoulder to shoulder. Some wear silks, others come barefoot. It does not matter. In this space, all eyes belong to the stage. The drums begin, soft and slow, like a heartbeat unsure of itself. Then the flute, high, thin, a breath from another world. A figure steps onto the stage, movements measured, inhumanly slow. A god, or a ghost, or a grieving widow, sometimes all three. The story unfolds not in words, but in the silence between them. The actors barely speak. When they do, it is in cadence, not conversation. And the mask, frozen, eternal, somehow seems to cry. This is not entertainment, it is ritual, memory, a haunting performed nightly under paper lamps. Backstage, the air is thick with heat, sweat pools beneath silk layers. Breathing becomes a labor of focus. The actor playing the tragic maiden shifts slightly, feet numb, spine locked into posture. He has done this 100 times, and still the pain surprises him. It is not art, without suffering. That is the rule. In another room, a younger boy, new to the troupe, practices a hand gesture by moonlight. He repeats it again and again and again. His teacher told him once, if they don't believe your hand, they won't believe your tears. He hasn't cried in weeks. The play ends with the ghost returning to the earth, unfulfilled. The curtain falls like dusk. The crowd applauds, quietly, respectfully. Then they vanish into the night, leaving only smoke and footprints, and the actors, those magicians of sorrow, remove their masks. They wash their faces, not gently, but quickly. There's no time to linger. The spell is broken. Tomorrow brings another ghost, another prince, another forgotten daughter pleading through a mask. One older actor lingers at the mirror. He catches his face, bare, aged, tired. He blinks. For a moment, he doesn't recognize it. Which version of himself is real? The man or the mask? He doesn't. No. He stopped trying to answer. Tonight, he'll sleep with sore knees and black under his fingernails. But the story was told, and that perhaps is enough. And you, eyes heavy, heartbeats slower now, may wonder as you drift into your own shadows. What mask have you worn too long? What stories have you told with silence? Sleep now. The stage is dark. The wind has changed. You can feel it as it sneaks beneath the bamboo slats, curling around your ankles like a hesitant ghost. Outside, the lanterns sway gently, their soft golden bellies flickering like memories. One by one, they begin to go out. Feudal Japan, so meticulously held in place by etiquette, blades, masks, and silence, begins to loosen its grip. The cracks are showing, small at first, barely noticeable to those living within the rhythms of rice planting, poetry, and war. But history, like a patient gardener, always knows where the roots will shift. It is the mid-19th century now. The old order is breathing its last, though it doesn't quite know it yet. The samurai, once untouchable, a class wrapped in law and legend, find themselves adrift. The swords they carry still gleam, but more and more they are sheathed for good. Their stipends shrink, their honor remains. But honor, it turns out, doesn't buy rice. The peasants, too, sense the change. The shogunate's grip has weakened. Foreign ships have appeared like omens off the coast. Black hulls, strange flags, engines that belch smoke like fire demons. The old men say the gods are angry. The young ones dream of steam and silk roads. In the city, a geisha closes her shamisen case and stares out the window. The brothel across the alley is quiet. Her client, a merchant from Nagasaki, muttered something about foreign tariffs and left without finishing his tea. The music she plays still floats on the air like petals, but fewer stop to listen. Even in the temples, the monks are uneasy. Scrolls are being replaced by books. Sutras copied by hand now arrive printed in foreign characters. A younger monk whispers of trains and telegraphs. The elder sighs, stokes the fire, and recites the old prayers, softly, as if to himself. And, in the village, far from court and commerce, a farmer watches his son recite the multiplication tables taught by a government instructor from the capital. He doesn't understand the numbers, but he sees the way his boy's eyes light up. It frightens him a little, and fills him with something else too, hope, perhaps. You see, feudal Japan did not end in fire. It ended in footsteps, quiet ones, the shuffling of feet over time, as generation after generation adjusted the weight of their burdens, inching towards something unknown. The Meiji era will come soon, like dawn after a long, still night. The samurai will vanish, not with a scream, but with a bow. The castles will crumble, or be turned into tourist attractions. The floating world of courtesans, calligraphy, and clandestine love will become a memory, dressed in silk and folded, away like an old haori. But before all that, there is still tonight. And in tonight, a woman in an old house pours warm sake into chipped porcelain, the fragrance mixing with tatami and wood smoke. A man sings softly to himself as he repairs a fishing net by lamplight. A child drifts to sleep, wrapped in a futon, her dreams still painted with fox spirits and talking cranes. And somewhere, across time and history, you, yes, you, have walked among them. You've stepped through storm-battered gates, touched rice, paper with your fingers, listened to frogs croaking in temple ponds, and watched the cherry blossoms fall with unbearable grace. You've bowed when you didn't want to. You've kneeled longer than was comfortable. You've felt the sting of cold water at dawn and the quiet dignity of things done without complaint. Feudal Japan did not want to impress you. It only asked that you endure, and you did. Almost. Now, as your eyelids grow heavy and your breath becomes slow, the lanterns of this ancient world begin to dim for the last time. Not with violence, not with regret, but with reverence. So let us leave them here. Let us close the gate gently behind us and bow, not out of obligation, but out of awe. Feudal Japan was not made for comfort, but it was made for memory. Sleep well, traveler, and should you ever return, may you do so quietly and with great respect. The fire is low now. The story is complete. Good night.